This is PTV World. I am Syed Shabahat Ali and you're watching Faultlines. While the tensions between US and Russia are peaking again, US Ambassador to Russia, John Sullivan, is returning to United States for consultations. US has recently announced sanctions against Russia. In return, Russia sanctioned 8 senior US administration officials, imposed new limits on American diplomats, and said it would expel 10 US diplomats, while the US warned against a cycle of escalation. Meanwhile, the Russian foreign minister visit to Islamabad comes after 9 years. Russian Foreign Ministry statement said a common concern for both the countries is the situation in Afghanistan. The relationship between Pakistan and Russia has remained difficult in the beginning of their diplomatic history. With the passage of time, both the countries importantly realized that their mutual cooperation is of immense importance in pursuit of their regional strategic objectives. It seems that India's gradual drift toward becoming American partner has devastated the hopes of Russia. And now Russia is realizing the geopolitical significance of Pakistan. Our team has prepared a package. Watch the package before I bring my first guest to the program.
With the rise of Vladimir Putin to power, Russia began to rise through the echelons of global power. This stirred international politics and has been bringing significant shift in global partnership. One such shift has been taking place in South Asia, where historical Indo-Russian partnership is being tested by increasing bilateral relations between United States and India. Not only bilateral, but multilateral partnerships led by the United States involve a large role of India, mostly because of the threat perception by the Chinese increment of economy and military power. Pakistan's shift of foreign policy from geopolitics to geoeconomics that focuses on balancing through connectivity has also enabled the evolution of her global partnerships. The emergence of China-Pakistan Economic Corridor as the most important recent economic project for Pakistan and the warming of relations between Pakistan and Russia in the recent past have all hinted towards Pakistan's changing partnerships. With the recent two-day visit by the Foreign Minister of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, to Islamabad, and the Russian amity offering a blank check, Pakistan's relationship with Russia is taking an upward trajectory. Pakistan and Russia now share multiple arenas for bilateral discussions, such as Afghan peace process, defense and military collaboration, and economy. Among many, Russia is reported to have investment portfolio of $14 billion in gas infrastructure for Pakistan and takes keen interest in the revival of Pakistan's steel mills. The changing trends in regional politics takes us to the question, how significant will Pakistan's relationship with Russia be in the future?
With me, my first guest in the program is a geopolitical expert, analyst and commentator, author of various books from Russia, Moscow. This is Leonid Seven. In my program, he's coming for the first time. Leonid, welcome to the program. And from Swat, I have with me a Director General of a famous think tank, Command 11, Mr. Syed Muhammad Khalid. First time in my program, he appeared in the last time episode, and this is the second time we have the pleasure of having his company in our program. I welcome both of my guests to the program. Leonid, my first question. What are the major regional challenges for Russia in this contemporary Euro-Asian environment?
In the contemporary Euro-Asian environment, for Russia, the most problematic challenges are from the West. It is the enlargement of North Atlantic Treaty Organization, attempt to organize coups in the post-Soviet republics by the West, the first of all in the Ukraine, and Ukraine our neighboring country. So we see many problems for the moment in this country. Ukraine was a candidate for the entry to the Eurasian Economic Union, and last year we see attempt to organize coup in Belarus, the also our ally. So the most problematic issues comes from the West, from European side. But we also see some problems in the Middle East. It is, of course, terroristic activity and export of terrorism to the Central Asian country. It's also important issue, and Russia tried to deal with it now.
Mr. Savin, what Russia exactly is looking for in Afghanistan?
Russia very well experienced it in Afghanistan. It's negative experience during the Soviet time, and now we try to achieve positive experience because Russia is provided platform for negotiation between official government and Taliban. So first of all, Russia would like to have a stable country in this region because Afghanistan have borders with post-Soviet republics, and some post-Soviet republics are members of Eurasian Economic Union and our political and economic partners. First of all, Tajikistan and Turkmenistan, for example. But now the goal is to build stable state in Afghanistan. Then Russia can to organize some kind of pragmatic movements, for example, to assist development of the country, to build infrastructure and to provide some engineering and different types of assistance. So there is two main goals. First of all, it's political stability, and second, economic development of the country.
Khalid, was United States, when it was so much engaged in Afghanistan, was causing any comfort for Russia? Because we have seen that Russia has not tried to play as a bad boy in Afghanistan as United States played against Russia when USSR was stuck in Afghanistan.
I think what we have to look at here is that in the beginning, when the U.S. invaded Afghanistan, President Putin and the Kremlin was in full support for the first 10 years of the U.S. occupation of Afghanistan. Since then, what we've seen is that Russia has now seen Afghanistan as a theater to challenge the U.S., whether it be on foreign policy or whether it be on a security point of view, like you said, much like the U.S. did with the former Soviet Union in the 1980s. So what we have to understand is that we've seen so many foreign policies and security failures in Afghanistan and Iraq that the U.S. has shown the world that their form of imperialism or their form of democracy cannot work out of the box for any conflict-ridden country. And these failures have cost them in reputation and strength, in confidence, in numerous foreign capitals, whether they be Baghdad, Kabul, Washington, or their own allies. And it's weakened their own narrative in the region, as well as creating a major power vacuum that was filled by non-state actors in the form of ISIS in Iraq and ISIS Kurdistan in Afghanistan.
Khalid, we have seen that Russia has been actively playing a role to bridge the gap between the Taliban and the West, maybe NATO, maybe US forces. Why do you think Russia has been playing this bridging role? Does that mean that the presence of US in Afghanistan was causing some comfort, as we said earlier, toward the elimination of terrorists that were even a problem for Russia in some parts of its country?
Well, we have to believe that for the first 10 years, the Russian mission was being carried forward by the U.S. Invasion of Afghanistan. The Central Asian republics were stabilized because numerous groups were not able to infiltrate into Afghanistan or get a foothold in Afghanistan because there was Russian support on the other side. We also saw that many things that could have caused problems in spreading extremism into the Southern Central Asian republics was stopped because the Russian movement on the other side was safe. It was 2014, I think, when we noticed that the U.S. and the Russians were no longer working in the same synchronicity. In 2014, we saw that Russia started to build their own networks of pro-Russian groups and started talking openly to the Taliban in Afghanistan. I think you remember it was 2015 when Kabulov said that Russia firmly believes that their objectives objectively coincide with the Taliban in terms of fighting the Islamic State. Now, we know the Russians were fighting them in Syria and with Afghanistan and the Taliban fighting them there. The Russians saw that their security and their comfort as far as themselves and the Central Asian republics was being confirmed. But we also saw blowback from the U.S. in the U.S. claiming that the Russians were supplying and arming the Taliban. They were providing them terror training camps inside of Iran. They also claimed that the Russians were providing numerous resources including fuel tankers from Uzbekistan that were generating millions of dollars monthly that were being used against U.S. forces, the Afghan army, the government, and the citizens. We also have to understand that the Russians do feel that under the Doha Agreement, they have been a little bit ostracized from the entire process, which brought about the Moscow meeting where President Putin invited the Taliban and sat down and discussed with them the potential for how Russia and the Taliban could work together moving forward. So yes, there was a lot of comfort in the first 10 years. But the second 10 years, we've seen Russia move independently to try and establish its own influence inside of Afghanistan that they can leverage down the road.
Let me get an endorsement of your thought from Russia. Khalid, hold on a moment. Savin, what has been happening in the Central Asian backyard? We have heard there have been problems between Russia and Ukraine meanwhile.
Two states of the Central Asian countries are members of Eurasian Economic Union. It's Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. So any activities in these regions very interesting for Russia from point of view of economic development and political stability and so on. And of course, any attempt of external powers, especially of United States, are very sensitive for the Moscow. From other side, we see that Ukraine is still unstable, and it's also a problem for the Russia because our doctrine of national security and our doctrine of foreign policy, first of all, interested in to have safe borders, and safe borders not only in Russia but also in neighboring country. Any kind of problems rising in these regions, problems also for the Moscow, and Moscow try to deal with it.
Khalid, has the drug trade been a problem for Russia towards Afghanistan, and do you think this is another issue that Russia is trying to address in Afghanistan?
Well, from everything we've read from the Russian think tanks and the Russian government, one of the core issues that they see coming out of Afghanistan post-U.S. withdrawal is the opium trade. 90% of the world's opium comes out of Afghanistan, and we believe for a long time that with the U.S. being involved in Afghanistan, with some kind of alternative crop being provided to the Afghani farmers, we would no longer see so much opium coming out of Afghanistan, and it wouldn't be infiltrating into the Central Asian republics or going through the Central Asian republics into Europe and other countries, or into Russia, for example. That sadly has not been the case. The Taliban is generating a large amount of money, a huge amount of money from the drug trade. For this to be stopped, for there to be any kind of security in stopping the drug trade and developing this income opportunity again for the Taliban, there needs to be some alternative crops, there needs to be alternative trade offered. I think the Russians have done a fantastic job in showing the Taliban that we can provide you with a supply line in terms of fuel, in terms of trade, if you're willing to work with us in solving some of the problems that Russia is very concerned about. Now we need to see how the Taliban is going to respond, how the future Afghan government is going to respond, and how the Afghani people are going to respond to this. So yes, there has been some effect with the drug trade in the Central Asian Republic, but there still needs to be a lot more done to make sure that the goals that have been achieved are not lost, and they can move forward and achieve more goals to stop and protect Russia more what they want.
Got it, Khalid. Savin, tell me how happy or unhappy Russia is with the drift of India towards United States, because we see now India becoming a major partner for United States in this region.
We see that India now drifting to the United States, and of course Moscow is not comfortable with this turn. But Indian point of view is need to have a balance because of China activity. But Russian-American relations for the moment is the most worst. But Russian-Chinese relation is the most best for the moment. And of course we are on the side of China during the moment. But I'm not sure that India hostile to the Russia. India just try to be flexible and to get some benefit from Russian-Indian relations. and Russia still open for cooperation with India. And this year we have a celebration 20 years of strategic partnership with India. And Russia still propose to New Delhi to be more pro-cooperative and not to be involved in any kind of American provocations. And yes, of course, Moscow see Quad like attempt to reorganize regional stability. And to be more honest, and our officials also told it that Quad provide regional instability, not stability. And we see Shanghai Cooperation Organization and kind of this type of new type of security the most effective, because historically any projects organized by United States bring instability, not stability.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sabin. Thank you very much, Mr. Khalid, for being my guest. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a break and we'll join back in a while. Stay with us. Welcome back. With me in my guest, I have Major General Retired Inamul Haq and Mr. Muhammad Ali, Director from CAS. Both of my guests, welcome to the program. We are going to talk about this relationship between Russia and the United States. Ali, I'm starting from you. So is it very clear now that United States and Russia are daggers drawn towards each other and looking toward an opportunity to inflict in whatever possible way?
Thank you so much about a very important topic that you've selected today. I think we can try to understand this complex relationship in a structured manner at the global, regional and bilateral level. At global level, I think despite somewhat provocative approach from the US immediately after the arrival of Biden administration towards Russia, I think Russia is showing a cautious approach, because both countries and the establishments in both countries are well aware that the international peace and security very heavily rests on stable relationship between these two despite divergent interests, because almost 90% of the total world's nuclear weapons are possessed by these two powers even today, despite the economic geopolitical changes. That is the reality. So the US establishment and the Russians are also keen that they continue to maintain a degree of trust despite growing acrimony and animosity in different regions. And in this context, you should see that Russia is challenging US politically and diplomatically in different regions, whether it is Syria, whether it is on different issues. The recent South Asia visit of Mr. Lavrov, he also in the joint press conference with our foreign minister expressed concern regarding the developments in Asia Pacific, and he chose the words very clearly and carefully, that he chose the word Asia Pacific, and obviously he was hinting towards the Quad formation. However, these geopolitical changes offer some limited time-sensitive opportunities for Pakistan, because there are areas of convergences emerging, whether it's the future stability of Afghanistan, whether it is containing the growing threat of Daesh in this region, because they have extensive experience of dealing with that in Syria, and also infrastructure development sees Pakistan as a future opportunity zone. However, there are limits as well. Lastly, in terms of international issues, I was just talking to the leadership of Pakistan's Foreign Office before I came to your program, and I raised two important questions. Because Russia still supports India in its membership case for the UN Security Council, and they have not reviewed their position. Secondly, they still support India in case of the Nuclear Suppliers Group membership as well. So for me, objectively speaking, despite the limited regional geopolitical and geoeconomic convergences, I think Russia still sees India as an important political and economic partner, because Indian military, and General Saab will explain much better than I can, that the Indian defense culture, their training, their posture, their equipment is heavily, whether it's Army, Air Force, Navy, is heavily of Russian origin. And even if America offers them high-tech weapon systems, they cannot overnight transform their posture, their culture, their training immediately.
General Saab, how would Russia take this Quad formation and United States increasing involvement in this region?
Let me go back a step. Thank you very much once again to be here. We are in a new Cold War. But differing to the previous one, this war is not about ideology. It is about geoeconomics that we need to understand first. Going to the relationship between US and Russia, there is a lot of bellicosity in the new administration towards Russia. And if you have followed the Russian press, especially the State of the Union address of the President Putin, he is not very happy about it. But on the other hand, there is the compulsion that America has. America needs Russian support for climate support agenda, which is very dear to the new administration's heart. So right now, I feel that the contours of the relationship are emerging. We have to maybe wait for a little while to see where this relationship goes. I agree that the establishment on both sides want to have a modicum of sensibility in their relationship. But how this relationship is going to go ahead, given the comments about Putin, the killer comments of President Joe Biden about President Putin, we have to see how it emerges. At the same time, Russia is not the Russia of 10 years ago. A lot of things have changed geopolitically. I have also written about this, that the recent rapprochement with Pakistan is also actually the Russian foreign policy change, where they want to remain effectively engaged in South Asia. And they have realized that Pakistan is the cornerstone of this relationship that they might have. The regional relationship which is emerging after the recent development, I call it the trichotomy of relationship between Pakistan, India and China, with Russia as an addendum. So this is a relationship which cannot prosper in isolation. We have to see Pakistan vis-a-vis India, vis-a-vis China, vis-a-vis Russia.
But would you agree that Russia and India are drifting away from each other with India's increasing romance with the United States?
The analyst community is betting on two things. They are saying that India, which was so-called not a protege but a state closely allied with the USSR and then Russia, is drifting towards Beijing. And Beijing is hostile to India. So this is a very interesting matrix which is coming up, and we have to see how it plays out. One comment that I would like to give, and I have said it earlier also, India will never take the US bait of going completely hostile towards China. It is not in their interest. India will also not completely divorce Russia. There are joint defense production projects to the tune of $32 billion inside India with Russian money, which are at this time in progress. And they include projects like Sukhoi 30, Krivat frigates, Igla air defense systems, T-90 tanks, and the S-203 Kalashnikov rifle. So it is very difficult for India to have a complete break with Russia at this point in time. 68% of the Indian military inventory is still Russian. So it is not an easy thing for them to just dump this relationship and move towards the
We'll come back to this later. Ali, how do you see this development of economic crisis between the two sides? United States put an allegation on Russia for cyber attacking, and then there are sanctions. The US ambassador in Moscow has traveled back to Washington to speak with the administration. Where are we heading to?
I think the acrimony is increasing between Washington and Moscow. That is very apparent, as Jan Saab also pointed out. And it was somewhat of a shock for the international observers when they saw Biden administration start off with a very aggressive tone towards Moscow rather than a careful approach. At a time when they want to build a quad against China. So this did not make geopolitical sense to antagonize an emerging and resurgent power at the same time. But you know, Moscow has increased heavy deployments near Crimea as well. More than 100,000 Russian troops are deployed there now, and they are ready for any eventuality. However, I think this relationship, both countries are very experienced in managing the crises in several, spread over last 70 years. You've seen so many crises. And I think the Russian approach has been careful. They are carefully observing the US behavior, and they are aligning themselves gradually with China. They are looking suspiciously towards Indian growing commitment towards the US, but I'll endorse what Jan Saab said. I think there are limits to what US can also expect in terms of strategic cooperation from India in the containment of China project, because Indian own interest is not to go beyond a certain limit. And I think the ultimate symbolic manifestation of that was the recent event in which a guided missile US destroyer, USS Paul Jones, violated the Indian law regarding the exclusive economic zone, and there was a clear statement from the US Navy formally saying that the US Navy does not recognize excessive Indian claims beyond international law. So that indicates that all is not hunky-dory between Washington and India, and India is reluctant to meet every expectation that the US has from it. And I think in that case, there is a limited opportunity for Pakistan as well to balance our relationship, not just with improving it with Moscow, but also warning our American friends that you should not harbor unexpected expectations from India.
General Saab, you wrote about Russia-Pakistan relationship recently. I wrote the article. You agree that there is a turbulence in the relationship in the past that we not often talk about, and then we have started drifting toward a different direction. Tell me a bit more about it.
The acrimony is quite old between Pakistan and Russia relationship, and it goes back to the days of the Soviet Union. And you know our role in Afghan war and the dismantling of the erstwhile one of the biggest empire in the world, the USSR. Having said that, Russia is very pragmatic in its foreign policy. Their foreign policy, if I may say, have three camps at this point in time, rather traditionally. One of the camp is Atlanticists, who say that we must have a very good relationship with Atlantic Europe and America. The other camp is the imperial camp. The imperial camp is basically more sort of galvanizing towards the relationship of the Russia with its erstwhile kingdoms and those states, soft and rebellion, South Asia and all that stuff, in Central Asia and all that. The third one is a Slavophile camp. The Slavophile camp is more inclined toward the relationship with the Eastern Europe. So these are the three camps, and there is always a jockeying for influence among these three camps. Having said that, there are some compulsions of the Russian foreign policy. The first, if we use the military parlance, is the dilution in space. It's too big a country with too fewer population. Good population, technical savvy population is a source of strength. As we call it, it's an element of national power projection. So that is Russia's compulsion. The second compulsion is that it is in a hostile Euro-Asian neighborhood. It is surrounded by neighbors who are not very friendly towards Russia, and it has been always the case. Third, and it is very interesting in 21st century, Russia chronically deals with food shortages. This has been sort of a sore point in its emergence as a superpower. Peter the Great, in modern, I think, Russia first grappled with this question. And now, the most important thing which has come up recently in Russian foreign policy is the foreign military sales, FMS as we call them. Russia is the second largest arms suppliers at this point in the world. Their arms exports previous year was to the tune of over a whooping $46 billion. So any country who is a customer, Russia has got good relationship with them. Now see India in that context. As I mentioned earlier, they have close to $25 to $32 billion of projects inside India. They have similar projects inside China. So that is a very important aspect that we need to keep in mind.
Ali, this process, this ice breaking between Russia and Pakistan, do you think it's driven by the diplomatic community, or is it driven by the military interest of the two nations together?
I think it is a convergence of both, and it is primarily based on the geopolitical changes in the world order. And simply put, basically, I think we see a revival of perhaps this Asian century will be a Eurasian century, in which you can see the emergence of BRI and also SCO and the revival of Russia in that context, in which the last 200 years were marked by the dominance and somewhat economic exploitation of Asia by the Western maritime powers. And there, the next 20-30 years, you will see an intensification of this contest playing out between maritime powers and Eurasian powers led by China and Russia. And in this context, the stability, peace and progress of Central Asia, West Asia and South Asia is very important. And I think here is where Moscow sees an opportunity to repair and move beyond the historical baggage with Pakistan that Jan Saab also pointed out, and build relationship on specific bilateral areas of mutual interest, such as anti-narcotics, defense sales, countering terrorism, containing Daesh, managing and stabilizing Afghanistan. These are issues which reinforce the mutual interest and can help build a relationship that seems promising, but still will take a lot of effort and time to build.
And what do you think are the main areas of economic cooperation? What do we have on the table? I have read in a newspaper that they're offering you to revamp this steel mill that is now in shambles. We are also hearing about this gas pipeline project. Can you tell me a bit more about it?
Basically, without going into specific, Russian expertise in infrastructure development, in heavy industries, in energy sector is quite immense, and Pakistan obviously can benefit from that. But obviously, we can we can seek Russian help in improving some of our defense equipment that is on the table. Perhaps some air defense equipment, some improving our. We are using Russian engine in our JF-17 Thunder. So maybe in future platform that we have used some of their cosmodromes in launching our satellites. So in future there are areas of aerospace, economic collaboration, energy, CASA 1000. In building infrastructure, that I think there are a lot of areas in which both countries can gradually, carefully and incrementally move forward. But to immediately expect Russia to ditch Indian market would be an unrealistic expectation.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a break and we'll join you in a while. Stay with us. Welcome back in the last segment of the program, and I'm straight away going to my guest in studio. General Saab, Pakistan and Russia both are looking toward Afghanistan. Both have a stake in the peace process. How do you think the process is going on so far? How much are we in touch with each other, and how much are we supplementing the peace process?
As you know, there is a parallel process which is called the Moscow format. The emphasis on both sides is that there should be a solution to the Afghanistan problem, which is Afghan-owned and Afghan-led. That is completely in alliance with what the Pakistani Foreign Office says, and it is in the interest of both these countries. Russia is in particular worried about two things from instability in Afghanistan. One is the narcotics trade through Tajikistan from the north of Afghanistan, and second is the unrest in the Muslims in its circulation soft underbelly. For these two reasons, it would like to have a stable Afghanistan, which is obviously in the interest of the region as a whole. How far this alliance between Pakistan and Russia is going to go, we have to see. If the talks in Istanbul are any guide, they both have to work a little harder on Afghan Taliban to bring them back to the negotiating table. There are certain sticking points which need to be resolved. Contradictory to what is touted in the press about the role of the constitution and role of the minorities and all that. The main sticking point is the power sharing inside Afghanistan. That has to be resolved. When there is some principal agreement on that between Pakistan, Afghanistan, Afghan government, Taliban and the Russian side, then probably the intra-Afghan dialogue can go forward. Without that, I don't see any prospect of it moving any forward.
How do you see this, Ali?
Very briefly, I think it would be inappropriate not to mention basically that there are three dimensions of conflict in Afghanistan which are simultaneously afoot. One is obviously between the Western forces and Afghan Taliban, which is expected to reduce and eventually end once the US and ISAF forces leave. The second contest is between Kabul administration and Afghan Taliban, and the third is the proxy war between different regional countries. So it would be my assessment that even if the US departs and the Western forces leave, the second and third conflicts will not only continue, but there is a realistic risk of further escalation, because it is a matter of time that once the Western forces leave, the Afghan Taliban will try to convert their military battle victories into political gains by challenging the Kabul administration. But we must warn our viewers, there is a realistic possibility that the NDS and Kabul administration and Afghan National Army, in order to not just tactically contest the invasion of Kabul, they will probably try to strategically hurt Pakistan's interests. And I think what happened in Serena Hotel in Quetta recently is a warning that we need to be very careful in terms of our internal security and ensure that BLA, BLF, TTP, Daesh do not use Afghan territory to cause harm to Pakistan's internal security, stability and progress.
That I agree that for Russia and for Pakistan, for both, this is an important point. But are our efforts actually synergized, or is this recent visit of Russian Foreign Minister going to increase the pace or momentum of the process?
Absolutely, that is the likely trend one hopes to see. But it would be inappropriate to overestimate our influence over Afghan Taliban, because Afghan Taliban is simultaneously engaged with Russia, with China, with Turkey, with US, with other countries, with Iran as well. So no one country enjoys veto over that. And as been publicly reported, that despite a lot of pressure on them to go to Istanbul, they did not. So that means no single party enjoys a disproportionate influence over their own decision making, particularly when their rank and file is hugely distrustful of the Western alliance, and also discourages any diplomatic commitment from their leadership with the West. So with the passage of time, I see there is the opportunity and the possibility of a diplomatic and peaceful resolution of Afghanistan, despite our sincere efforts. Their prospects will reduce.
General Sir, we have discussed so far what has happened or what has been happening. Let's discuss for a while what should be happening more between Pakistan and Russia to increase the collaboration, to increase the gains from this diplomatic discourse that we are talking about.
As I wrote earlier also, the present detente between two countries, it is actually led by the military diplomacy. Long before the Foreign Office, there were exchanges between the two militaries, there were visits between the two militaries, and there was a sense of amity between the two militaries. So that led the way, paved the way for the official engagement of both countries. As I wrote, Russia is a substitute source of military supplies to us. It is pretty high tech and it is not very expensive, so that has to be seen. But Russian willingness to offer us sophisticated arms and equipment will take a lot of hard work and a lot of trust between the two countries. So I don't see it in the short term. It might happen in the long term or in the medium term, but not in the short term.
Ali, beyond military exchanges, beyond military support, what do you think Pakistan and Russia has with each other that can happen in the near future?
I think just taking further from what Jansab just said, the most important achievement for Pakistan in terms of bilateral Pak-Russia relation is that perhaps India no longer enjoys the veto over military cooperation between Moscow and Islamabad. And that is why this recent visit by Foreign Minister Lavrov is significant, that we will probably see a prospect of improving military relations. However, we should reinforce it with and benefit from Russian experience and expertise in infrastructure development, perhaps improving our heavy industries complex, steel mill and other infrastructure development. There is also a possibility of expanding the energy cooperation. But beyond that, I think it will be a careful incremental progress that both countries will have to consistently ensure to achieve and build a relationship which can help eventually recover from the historical baggage.
Thank you very much,
If I may just add a comment to it. I think the litmus test and the watershed event would be President Putin visiting Pakistan,
which we are waiting since 2012.
Right.
Thank you very much, Muhammad Ali. Thank you very much, General Naam, for being my guest in the program. Ladies and gentlemen, we can clearly see that there is an evident upward trajectory in bilateral relationship between Russia and Pakistan. There are so many areas of cooperation and there is so much on the table. It is now up to both the governments. How do they capitalize on the opportunities in hand? We'll join you next week with another program. And until then, Allah Hafiz.